Our next speaker is Dr. Monica Paoli. She is a physician and a postdoc researcher in the Werstuck Lab at McMaster University. Her research investigates the protective role of estrogen in pancreatic beta cell health and function and atherosclerosis progression, and how women are overlooked in medical research. Monica loves soccer, and when living in Italy, was a season ticket holder of her favorite Italian soccer team. Needless to say, she was also very happy with the outcome of the recent European soccer tournament. Over to you, Dr. Paoli.
Thank you very much. I'm going to talk to you about sex differences in biomedical research. But before I do that, I want to talk to you about what my typical day is. So I wake up and I usually have a list of things that I want to achieve. Some of them are related to my work. Some of them are personal. And then I turn on my laptop and I'm overwhelmed with a lot of emails. And each email is asking me to do something else and something on top of all my list of things to do. So my everyday looks like an ever-growing, constantly, an ever-growing to-do list. And among the things that I like to do is I like to save some time for me to go for a walk. But for example, today, because of this ever-growing to-do list, I was not able to do that, which you might think, given the fact that it was so cold, it's not even a bad idea. But anyway, I'm going to ask you, have you ever had days where your to-do list is growing so much that so many things that you have there become an I'll do it later kind of thing? And I'm pretty sure we've all been down that path. Researchers included, unfortunately. So I'll do it later in biomedical research. Is that true? Is that really a thing? Unfortunately, yes. So biomedical research encompasses a broad area of research where we perform research in cells, in animal models, as well as in humans. And up until among the majority of the time, we've been conducting studies predominantly using male subjects. And this was done mainly because we wanted to have simpler systems. So researchers in the past didn't really want to deal with situations such the fluctuations of hormones that we see in female subjects. So they thought, okay, let's just study a simpler subject, so male subjects, and then apply our findings to the general population, which includes men, women, and gender diverse people. So you might think there's nothing wrong with that, right? Well, unfortunately, as researchers of the past, we were wrong. And this one-size-fits-all approach was not really the great way to go, because we've been observing in recent years that women tend to experience more side effects than men, especially for medications such as painkillers and medication for cardiovascular diseases. Women can have up to twice as much risk to have side effects than men. But then at the same time, women tend to be protected from the development of certain diseases such as diabetes and cardiovascular diseases. And at the same time, we also have that autoimmune diseases such as rheumatoid arthritis or multiple sclerosis tend to be more frequent than, in women than men. So as you can see, this one-size-fits-all approach is not the proper way to go. And so the good news is that the major funding agencies in North America, so the NIH for the States and the CIHR for Canada, are actually trying to switch this mindset. And they are urging researchers to include sex as a biological variable and gender. So in this case, it's important to note that we need to rethink how research is carried out. So we can't say that we are doing an inclusive research if we just include males and females in our study subjects. But it's important that we include them and we analyze the sex effects towards our research question. So it's important that we perform quality research versus quantity research. And this is where my research project comes into place. So my research project studies the effects of estrogen in pancreatic beta cell health and function. So in non-nerdy ways, I am basically studying how women are protected from developing diabetes when compared to men. So I'm going to give you a little example in my research study of how important sex differences are. So to study diabetes, we are using a mouse model which has diabetes, and this diabetes is induced by a genetic mutation. So as expected, our male mice are diabetic. And in this picture, I want to show you what you see here is a pancreatic beta cell. So the pancreatic beta cells are the ones you see in green. And the green fluorescence is basically insulin, which is the major regulator of diabetes. You might have recalled that people with severe diabetes rely on insulin to control their glucose levels. So as you see here, these males are diabetic and the green fluorescence is there, but it's not that prominent. Whereas females, even though they have the same genetic mutation, they are not diabetic. They are only transiently diabetic, and then their levels of glucose normalize. And this is happening when their female sex hormones are peaking. And as you can see here, we have another image that shows us that insulin is produced normally. And as we saw, these females are able to fully control their glucose levels. So my project and also the recent changes in the NIH and CIHR policies are very important. But we still need to take more steps because by studying sex as a biological variable and gender, we're going to better understand how these are influencing everyone's health. And in particular, this is important because it will allow us to get better preventative as well as therapeutic strategies. So that being said, are you ready to come on a walk with me and not do it later? Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much for your talk. Some really interesting and important work that you're doing at the university. So we have a question from the audience. What, in your opinion, is the most surprising difference between men and women's physiology or their response to medication?
Okay, thank you. That's a great question. So I think what is more surprising is probably when we're talking about the response to medication is seeing how we have female subjects having much more risk of side effects. And there have been studies where ideally they hypothesize, oh, maybe it's just because of their the way their physical features are, maybe because of the body weight, it's a bit, they're a bit smaller. But that doesn't seem to be the case. So there's clearly an influence of sex hormones in how we are dealing with this medication. So I think that is really interesting to know. And as a physician, since it's 2022 and we're still prescribing the same medication with the same doses in males and females, it's so important that we take a look thoroughly at all these things and particularly aim at a better therapy and more targeted therapy for all of us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Monica. We have a couple of questions about comparing different groups in biomedical research. We have some about should we be comparing age or generations? And perhaps what will the biological gender research, how will it take into account long-term transgender biological research and impacts?
Thank you, Connie. these are all great questions. So indeed, if we want to be very inclusive, we need to take into account all these groups. I wasn't able to go into too much detail about my research, but I can say that in terms of considering aging, that is actually one of the many aspects of my project. And the reason being the fact that women are protected from diabetes before menopause, but so that's when their estrogen levels are high. But then once they reach menopause, so their estrogen levels are lowering down, they become as prone to developing diabetes as men. And in particular, they can have much more severe complications. So we do have clinical studies that are actually looking at all this. And we also, in my project, but in general, we can also reproduce or at least sort of create models with animals that are similar to menopause. So that is actually something that's being done. In terms of the effects of hormonal therapies for transgender people, for example, that is also an area of research that it's very poorly understudied and poorly understood at the moment. And so I am a strong advocate that looking at sex as a biological variable also implies looking at how hormones are affecting systems. So that is definitely an area that needs to be researched more in the future.
Fantastic, thank you. And so just speaking about menopausal women, are postmenopausal women affected differently by medications than premenopausal women?
So that's another good question. So what happens is that because we have these hormonal fluctuations, as a consequence of that, we also have some modification in our body, in our structure. So yes, we can have some modification in how we are responding to medication after menopause. But again, this is such an area that is so understudied that we need to increase our attention on these topics.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Monica.
Thank you.